hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me.
When we think of our life with the Messiah, what comes to mind?
Well, we should recognize that he is our life. Without him, we were dead in our trespasses and sins. We have the foretaste of the blessings. We have fellowship. We have just the joy, a heart that loves the Scripture.
All because of Messiah?
What's that?
All because of Messiah?
All because of Messiah.
Yeshua, Messiah, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, yo. It's Wednesday, January 9th, 2019. This is Messiah Matters number 248. Sugar-free for 9 days and feeling great. My name is Caleb Haig, and with me, a man that could never remember to prepare an intro, so I'll just do it for him.
I had it.
Go for it.
Drinking cool water from a TorahResource.com mug.
Dude, I am representing today. Look at this.
So am I.
Torah Resource Institute started, winter quarter 2019 started. Yes, we see your mug. Thank you.
I was there.
Yesterday. Boom. Look at that.
Dude, you got to hook me up.
Representing the school. And if you're not signed up for classes, what are you doing?
Dude, you got to hook me up with one of those mugs.
I can do that. Check this out, everybody. Rob and I have been scheming behind the scenes. So we've decided to add another stop on the tour, the Messiah Matters tour, and I'm going over to Spokane. So we're trying to hook it up so that so here's what happened. Beit Hillel in Tacoma asked if we could come and start
That'll
the tour.
probably be our first one.
That'll probably be our first one. So they want to fly Rob over, which is awesome because they'll fly Rob over, and we'll have a great time here in Tacoma, which is awesome. The funny thing is Rob said to me, is it kind of going to be like Yeshua saying that a prophet isn't accepted in his own home? Like people at Beit Hillel are like, wait, isn't that Caleb? Wait, what's he doing up there? We know you. But with that said, then my family is going over to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Little vacation with a couple of great folks.
Nice little town, lake town.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever actually gone into Coeur d'Alene, like Coeur d'Alene proper. I've been on the lake with you, right? We drove a boat.
We got to hook you up, man, while you're over here.
I know. We drove a boat. We went to some hippy dippy produce store. It was great, actually. I love it.
Hippie produce.
Yeah, it was like a Whole Foods, but it didn't cost nearly as much, and it was even better.
Patchouli wafting through the aisles.
Exactly. Joshua asks, when can we start signing up for the spring quarter? That'll actually happen probably 4 weeks from now, maybe a month. So yeah, but you can still.
Wow, that's a good question, but I don't have a clue because we're just this is day 2 of winter quarter.
You can still sign up for winter quarter, by the way. You have until next Monday, I believe, to sign up for winter quarter. So if you want to, TorahResource.com, go to Institute, find the classes. We got a couple of really good ones.
3 classes that I'm doing. Well, one is probably, unless you've had Greek, you wouldn't be able to jump in because it's assuming you already had first quarter. But the other 2 classes are standalone that I'm doing. Studies in the Torah,
which is a good one.
Pretty reading. Well, the other 2 classes are what we call reading intensive. One is Introduction to Rabbinic Literature, and the other is Studies in the Torah.
Adam's in the chat room. We should ask Adam. What do you think, man? Adam is one of my cohorts going to Coeur d'Alene. We're going to meet in Coeur d'Alene. What do you think? Should we go to I haven't even brought it up to him. Should we go to Heart of Messiah on Erev Shabbat and do a tour? Well, we'll wait and see what he says.
I'm imagining, Caleb, with your electric cello and maybe with a couple effects pedals.
I think that would, what else would we do?
That's what I'm thinking.
It just seems appropriate all the way around. And Adam says, yes, please. And oh man, look at this. Mike's on top of it. Our student services now being handled by Mike. He says spring quarter registration around February 18th is when we will start registration. So yeah, we're looking forward to that as well. Anyway, sign up for classes. I want to thank our producers real quick and say thank you so much for being our producers. Here are our producers' names for anyone who wants to know who produces this show. And you can become a producer. Go to TorahResource.com and hover over media. Go down to Messiah Matters and something pops out that says producer. Click on that. You get all the information there. And
That's
that's right.
You're going to be a
By the way, we got another inside joke that I don't think a lot of people know. But we got another one that we're going to turn into a shirt for this show. And all it says is first.
And we didn't invent it.
We did not invent
know
it.
It's out there. First.
Dude, there's only like a couple of people in the chat room are going to know what in the world they're talking about.
First.
But first.
It's when we open up well, actually, I don't have it open. But
it's a shout out to Derek Pauly.
Derek was the first, I think.
He was the first to say first. Yes.
Yeah. And then basically you just put first, meaning I'm here first. And then today we had someone else do it.
Well, we've had like 3 other people that are like first. So awesome.
It reminds me because, I have a family with 6 kids, right? One of 6. And we'd whenever there was something cool, we were racing to it, to get there and to sit down, they'd say first. And then everybody's like, oh.
Oh, dude, awesome. All right, we're having too much fun. It's fun to be back in this in the uh-oh, I froze up. Hang on. Let's see what's going on. There we go. It's fun to be back in the broadcasting seat. We love being here, and we're so grateful that people actually listen to this show and support the show. And also, I talked about our producers. Hang on just a sec. Let me the one thing I didn't mention is that for all of our supporters, and you can become a supporter for $5 a month, as little as $5 a month. You have access to Messiah Matters More. It's a great page where we put extra content, and where we will be posting, by the way, our Messiah Matters More tour. When we go to these places, we're going to try to videotape them, and we're going to put them in the Messiah Matters More section, and that's open for any of our producers and any of our supporters. Anyway, there's a new video up. We put it up yesterday.
We try to do something weekly, but usually it's 3 times, average about 3 times a month.
Right, and
just you and I talking. But there's additional content. Yeah,
lectures,
the Denver conferences and Ontario, all that stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to, also if we write something, which we haven't written anything in a long time, but if we write something, it usually goes up in there. So anyway, the point is the whole point of all that is that there is a new video up there on what do we do? Acts 21. It's about 17 minutes long.
There's a voicemail, a great voicemail.
Oh, and thank you for saying that, because I have to mention this. Luke, if you're listening to this, Luke is the one who sent the voicemail, and we're gonna address
Tim.
Oh, is it? It's Tim. Tim, I'm sorry. Tim sent in the email.
It was a Bible name.
It was a Bible name. Yes, exactly.
It was a New Testament Bible name.
Tim sent in this. He called the comment line. We're going to respond to his question on Hebrews probably next week, but we responded to his question on Acts 21 in the Messiah Matters More section. Tim, if you're listening, shoot me an email, and I will send you a link to that so that your specific question can be answered on that one.
You have to prove to us that you're the same Tim.
Yes, exactly.
You have to tell us something about your voicemail that nobody else would know.
And Helen says, rumor from here is that you're coming to Ontario. Yes, we Rob and I are currently planning. We're planning to come to Ontario. This actually came from someone outside of Helen's
that the winter doesn't freeze you guys over up there.
Yeah, we're probably going to come up in June.
Things thaw.
Yeah, June. Yeah. Somebody else is the one who contacted me about Ontario, though, and they're about an hour away from Helen's community, and so we're trying to coordinate between the two. I think it'll be a good time, though. I'm very excited to get back up to Ontario. Honestly, I had a lovely time up there. The people are just fantastic. I'm excited to see Helen, and I hope to meet Helen's husband, and her children were awesome. The Takaks, man, I love that family. They're great, and they're hockey fans. So, all right, let's get this out of the way real quick.
I would be showing my ignorance there because don't know the first thing about hockey.
I got a hockey jersey out of it too. So, okay. 253-465-3205. Speaking of Tim calling our comment line, you can call it too. 253-465-3205. You don't talk to us. Just leave a message and tell us what you're thinking. And shoot us an email, chegg@torahresource.com. It's CHEGG, 2 G's at torahresource.com. And Helen says AC this time, I promise. It was hot. Torah Resource.
You guys went August, yeah.
Yeah, Torah Resource is Torah Resource. Messiah Matters is brought to you by Torah Resource. Go to Torah Resource for all of your research needs and sign up for school. You should do it. You don't have to be in a program. You can just sign up for individual classes. Okay, with all that said, let's get into it. We've had some really good. By the way, Rob doesn't even know this. I checked. I was told to check the Torah Resource Facebook. Now, Messiah Matters has its own Facebook page. And we did that because Rob loves, and rightly so, loves to post little things up there throughout the week. So you can go and like our Facebook page. It's Messiah Matters. Well, Torah Resource has a Facebook page as well. What I did not realize is that people have been sending us questions to the Torah Resource Facebook page as well. Oh. So I went in there yesterday. I pulled about 4 questions. Fantastic questions. Hard questions, honestly. I looked at them and I thought, man, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to... I'm gonna have to really.
Is there an app to consolidate all
I know, right? Well,
questions?
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't generally, we're not neglectful. Usually, generally, it's not our nature to. We're not trying to avoid a question. It's just so if you ask a question and we don't hear back, and you don't hear back, feel free to ping us again, and it's not going to feel like you're hassling us or anything.
That's right. Okay, so anyway, I got a bunch of those. We're gonna address those, but for now, let's go to this. This is a good question. We met this wonderful young lady, Susan, down in Colorado Springs when we were there, and man, was she fun to talk to, and just a blessing to meet her and talk to her about. She's got tons of ministry opportunities, and she's leading a ladies group, and like my wife does. My wife leads a ladies group as well. So it was really nice to sit and chat with her and see how the Lord's using her. So she writes in and she says this. She says, so I was listening to a recent podcast and I heard Rob comment that the 10 Commandments aren't actually in an imperative form. Since my Torah ladies group and I will be starting Exodus 20 on Monday morning, I thought I'd ask for some elaboration on that idea. So this was sent on, I think, over the weekend. So our apologies for being late because now, she started on Monday. That's when she wanted...
yeah, we can talk about it a little bit anyway.
Well, absolutely. I don't think she's the only person who mentioned this.
No, Wendy sent an email asking about it too. So if you hear from at least 2 completely different sources, that the idea was latched on out there, and so we appreciate getting that so we can go back and clarify. It might sound a little technical, but if we have to put on our grammar hat. When in English, if I say, Caleb, go do this, go to the store and buy some bread, that in English, we would break that down and we'd say the verb go is what we call a command form or an imperative. It's literally a command, right?
That's go do this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like in Matthew 10, where the centurion who's describing authority says, I say to this one, go, and he goes. I say to this one, come, and he comes, right, et cetera, et cetera.
This is called an imperative.
We call that an imperative.
Right.
We call it an imperative or command form. In English, we call it that. In Greek, we call it that. In Hebrew. The 10 Commandments, what we call the 10 Commandments, are not in that imperative form. It's in a slightly different grammatical construction. And we know that the word, the 10 Commandments is really a later, I think probably, early modern description. Because obviously in the Hebrew, in the Torah itself, they're not called the 10 Commandments. They're called the what?
10 words.
The 10 words, the Devarim, Aseret HaDevarim, the 10 words. So, and then the actual grammatical construction, if you look at the 10 words, I pulled them up here, like the first one, right, is Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. And then it's Lo Yehyeh Lecha Elohim Acherim. There will not be for you other Elohim.
So in other words,
So
it's
literally,
not,
if I were
you
to
will
translate
not,
it.
So wait, hang on just a sec. Let me see if because not being the Hebrew scholar that you are, let me try to break this down. So it's not, you will have no other gods before me. That would be an imperative. In other words, it is that, but rather it is, there will be no other gods for you. Right. Okay.
And the same thing with verse. Now, there's numerous subcategories. We don't need to get into the division. Obviously, the Jewish tradition divides the 10 up different than the Catholics, than the Lutherans, than the Reformers, etc. But if you look at verse 7, Lo tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha, you will not take the name of the Lord.
But
like
is it,
the
okay.
NASB says, you shall not.
But
so the idea here is...
Wait, hang on just a sec. But isn't that in some ways an imperative because you will not? In other words, like, isn't that a command? Isn't it some form of a command?
Here's where it shifts. So if the Torah itself calls them words, the 10 things, the 10 Devarim, the 10 words, we do see in the Greek, in the apostolic writings, for example, Matthew 15 or Mark 7, when Yeshua says, you transgress the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition. And then when he lists the commandment, he lists commandments, right? Or with the rich young ruler, he says, well, you know the commandments, and this is the Greek word entole. You know the commandments, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal. He lists the 10 words, and he's calling them entole, or the commandment. And then again, I think it's like Romans 13, like if there's any commandment, right? And he lists commandments from the 10 words.
Can I just stop you for just 1 second?
Yeah, go ahead.
We have to note this. Oh, did that work?
Mm-hmm. I heard it.
Jonathan Bishop just gave us our first super chat. It's the first time anyone's given us a super chat. $5 to Jonathan Bishop. We appreciate your donation. And he says, I know you all get a lot of flack for calling out people such as Monty Judah and Jonathan Kahn, but I just wanted to say I appreciate you doing so. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, man.
We appreciate that. And Joshua, before that, he asks this question. He says, what mood is it in the lexicon? He's talking about the 10 words.
That's awesome. What's so funny? His name's Jonathan?
Yeah.
Jonathan, what you don't know is Caleb, right before our show, Caleb's like, and I didn't even know this existed. He's like, you know what? I'm surprised that no one's used Super Chat before. Like literally
right
20 minutes ago.
Yeah. Right
so that's really cool that in the same day you jumped on that and did that. So, sorry. So the other bit was...
Joshua asks, what mood is it in the Septuagint? In other words, what mood is the...
Okay.
So do we have commands or... imperative?
Good question. The Greek I'm not talking about the Greek in the apostolic writings. I'm talking about the Greek Septuagint of, like, say, Exodus 20. It follows the same it's replicating the Hebrew exactly. It uses lo, which is the negative particle, plus what we call a Greek would be a future. In the Hebrew, it's an imperfect. You will not. So it uses not plus a future form. Now, when you learn Koine Greek, they'll say this is a command form. They'll say it's a kind. They don't classify it an imperative, but they kind of put it under a kind of negative imperative. But when we understand it in terms of, here's the point. The core point is this: command is not a helpful enough term to get the nuance. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay,
it's okay to call it a commandment because they're clearly commandments. There's a commander, and then we're commanded. But the Hebrew doesn't use the word mitzvah or yetzaveh, which is that verb in he commanded. In this situation, it calls them words rather than mitzvot. And because it's a covenant, these are ongoing instructions or directions in behavior. And they're truths. Here's the other thing. They're also truths. In other words, Yeshua, for example, abided in them as truths, right? He never sinned. So they describe, for Yeshua, they describe the reality of his life. And as we are more and more shaped into the image of Yeshua, as we are renewed in our mind, etc., and we're pruned and corrected and we bring more fruit, we are also it's more and more describing our life. And so anyway, that's a little nuance I think that gets missed if we just say, oh, it's like God said, go do this, and now the person goes and does something. That has to do with projecting covenant life reality, what the terms of the covenant are. So I don't know if that's helpful. Maybe that's a nuance that isn't helpful for people. I'm hoping I'm doing a decent job of communicating, but it's helpful for me.
Fair enough. I'm a little I want you to expand just a little bit on the idea of there will not be. So in other words, it's not necessarily that it's not a command, but it's just not an imperative. Because it's not a command to us. There will not be.
Well, okay, with the first commandment, or the second commandment, if it's lo yehyeh lacha Elohim acharim, there will not be. That has to do with the third, how you say to have. There's no verb in Hebrew to have. It's lihyot le, to be to, like to haya le, to be to something means there is to me.
Right.
There was to me, right? Or there will be to me.
Yeah, it's relation.
So
it's like
maybe that commandment's not the best exemplar for this point.
Yeah, it's weird in Hebrew because it's like relation. It's like spatial relationship is how a lot of that is. That's the way I've understood it. In other words, there is to me, like it's almost spatial relationship is how you say there will be, or like there will be for me. Or
here's another idea about a commandment. Just if we're going to just push on this a little further, like Caleb, you say, Rob, call me on Skype, right? Or you text me, or you send we would say, okay, that's a command. Then what I do is I get on, I do what you asked or what you told me to do, right? We would say, okay, that's fulfilled now. It's not an ongoing. It's not like for the rest of my life I should be on.
I see.
It's a kind of punctiliar kind of aspect to it. Whereas the 10 words are not that way. The 10 words are imperatives into the degree that that someone who is learning what not to do and turning away from what not to do and walking in what to do, and it's an ongoing, right? There's no day where I'm not obligated.
Right. Okay. I understand.
Carl says, this is a whole discussion.
Carl in the chat room says it's called a negatory indicative. I use it with my kids sometimes. Awesome. I asked him for an example.
No, that's really good. Is that Carl from?
Yeah.
Carl, right on, Carl. That's a great point because it's instructive, right? You will not do this. Like, you will not run out in traffic, into the street. That kind of thing. Yeah. A parent to a child saying you will not run out into the street does not mean just right now.
All the time.
That means this is like a reality that you're to abide within.
Right.
And my only point is that commandment, it's okay to be a little bit commandment might not be the best, most accurate way to think of that whole concept. That's it.
Got it. We got a comment. We're going to change gears here, and as I change gears, let's bring this up real quick. 253-465-3205. That's our comment line, and see how you get TorahResource.com. So if you have any comments about our conversation on the 10 words, you can send it there. Luke writes, and this is where I was getting confused between Luke and Tim, and I apologize. Luke writes, "Hi, brother. I'm enjoying watching the videos. I have a question for you. As you may know, many New Testament scholars affirm that we have close to 6,000 ancient Greek New Testament manuscripts. Do you know what is the age range for a manuscript to be considered ancient?"
Wow. Yeah. That's so ancient itself is a vague term. Usually what it means is like, it's no more clear than say like from days long gone or, days, in a world before or an age before our age kind of thing. So it's too vague. You won't see it used much in the writings of like Dr. Daniel Wallace or those that they might use it in introducing a paper or something and that they're going to give a presentation just to kind of orient readers, especially if, if they're just talking to lay people, into like, oh, that's a long, long time ago. And then they'll get into the nuts and the bolts. But it's not really a helpful term. If you get ancient, it's not in when talking about manuscripts. Because if you're really going to be all in and talk about manuscripts, basically you just got a chronology, like a giant ruler, and then you've got scholars doing their best to place each individual manuscript on that timeline. And not only on a timeline, but geographical location and genealogical relationship with other manuscripts, right? Just like in our Messiah Matters More that we put up this week, we talked a little bit about Acts 21, and there's a textual variant that you see in what we call the Textus Receptus, which is, we see it in the King James, but you won't see it in NIV, NASB, ESV, Net Bible, or any of that. Well, why is that? Well, it's because different manuscripts were given privilege, were given priority than were given in the King James. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We have to remember one thing, and Dr. Wallace makes this point, that in the days of the King James, they only had so many manuscripts available to them, right? They didn't have,
right.
They had the printing press, but communication still happened at the speed of horseback, and they didn't have access to all these other manuscripts. They couldn't just travel the world, and so that's textual criticism. What if we use that term? That is the field of study that tries to make sense of the manuscripts we have when we don't have the original autograph. Like, for example, no one's claiming we have Paul's original, like right. This is the actual, papyrus or whatever that Paul wrote on, and this is his actual handwriting. Like we have, for example, Thomas Jefferson's writing of different drafts of the Declaration of Independence, or we have, Abraham Lincoln in his own hand sketching out the Gettysburg Address. We have stuff like that. We don't have Paul's sketches for Romans, right? So the question is, what do we do then? How do we have 3,000, 4,000, 6,000 manuscripts? How do we be good stewards? What is God's wisdom in making sense of them? And how do we sort them? How do we arrange them? How do we know which ones to give priority? And so sometimes you might see the word ancient in that case to differentiate texts that would be from, let's say, the 2nd through the 5th century from texts that maybe a medieval Catholic scribe wrote, like in the year 1100 or 1200. They're going to say the ancient, if I were given both those sets, I would say the ancient ones are the ones from before the rise of Islam, back in the 300s, 400s. And I would say the medieval ones, I would call them medieval. I wouldn't call them ancient. But that's my personal sense of the term.
Joshua actually makes here's his point. He says, I believe that the manuscript is in quotes, manuscript title ends around the time that the printing press was created. What I mean by this is that I believe scholars stop using this title for writings written after the invention of the printing press.
Oh, manuscript?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Technically, manuscript is just from Latin, manus for your hand, and script is for writing. I think
what Luke was asking was more about the question of the word ancient as opposed to manuscript. In other words, Joshua is using maybe, I don't want to misrepresent. Joshua, it seems to me, is looking more at the title manuscript, whereas Luke was asking more about the word ancient. What makes it ancient manuscript? Joshua's talking more about manuscript itself.
So, for example, here's some differentiation. I would say that Josephus was an ancient author, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are ancient manuscripts. But I would then say that our oldest, probably, I would have to go check, but something like this, our oldest manuscripts of Josephus might not be ancient. In other words, we know Josephus was an ancient writer. He lived in the 1st century BC, and he wrote then. But our manuscripts of Josephus' writings, the surviving writings or copies, are probably written by medieval scribes, and they're not considered ancient in my view. So do you see that even there you could be confused as, wait a minute, if it's ancient, if Josephus wrote it, it's ancient. Well, the manuscript was produced, let's say, in 1100 or 1200, but Josephus himself lived 1,000 years or more prior to that. So the word is used relatively to differentiate between significant points on a chronology scale. That's and then manuscript, back to the term manuscript, however, even now, even today, if a book publisher is going to publish your work, you submit a manuscript, and they use the word manuscript, even though it's digital.
Right.
So today, the book printers will say the digital file that you submit, or the printed digital file from your computer, is called the manuscript, and then once it's printed and you've got a book, hot off the press, that's not the manuscript. So even the word manuscript in today's book publishing jargon doesn't mean written by hand anymore. It just means it's the author's work submitted in its final form pre-publishing.
So Adam, I think
we're getting into the weeds here.
Adam hits the nail on the head here. He says there isn't a date on the timeline to define ancient. It is a fluid term. Good.
That's an excellent way to put it. Subjective, yeah.
Okay, let's move on. So this comes from multiple places, but we get asked this question often, and not by one person. I took Helen. She's in the chat room. I took Helen's question because she kind of touches on it, and I basically formed another question out of her question. Her question goes like this: have you or your father written or have you lectured on the divorce of Israel? I guess it would lead into the idea of how the church replaced Israel. So there's so many different aspects to this. The two main aspects that we get, and what Helen is talking about in terms of replacement theology, is God divorced Israel, and therefore he's done with Israel. She can't return, and therefore God has chosen someone else, and that someone else is the church. This is how this is a theology that a lot of people within modern Christianity, whether they know it or not, some people don't even know this is really what they're putting forward, but some people certainly know that this is what they're putting forward. But the idea is that the church has replaced Israel because Israel was divorced. So that's one idea. The problem with that is that prophecy in and of itself, we can speak against replacement theology all day long. The main problem with that is that the prophecies clearly speak of God's relationship with Israel in the end times. In other words, even the new covenant, right? In those days, I will make a covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? So obviously, and it's talking about Israel and Judah. Judah goes away. I don't think that's the wrong. Let's rephrase that. Judah doesn't go away. Judah gets put in its rightful place, which is part of Israel. In other words, I think that God's plan is that Israel is one entity. It's not two. Israel and Judah are not two separate entities. It's Israel. Judah is part of Israel.
Because of sin, they were separated.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, that's a.
So, but the point here is that I don't think that biblically this actually can speak to Torah observance as well, because one of the big objections that we have, or that we may hear, and we talked about this in our Messiah Matters More video, one of the big objections that we hear is, the Torah is only for Israel. It was only for Israel. It's not for the Gentiles. It's only for Israel. We even see this when we get into passages like Acts 15 and Acts 21, right? That's for the Jews. The Gentiles have separate laws. And why is this? Well, because Israel is no longer God's people. Now, the church is God's people. So if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, this is not what I believe, by the way. I'm showing what a lot of mainstream replacement theology would say. If you're part of the church, even if you have Jewish blood, you're no longer really part of Israel. You're part of the church, and therefore you're one of God's chosen. I reject this. I think if you're listening to this show for the first time, or if you're stumbling upon us, I reject this straight out. I just don't think that this can be upheld at all within Scripture.
Yeah. One quick, if you're talking about that with somebody, you can just say, why did Yeshua cite Isaiah 56 when he's knocking over the money changing tables, right? that my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples.
Well, the Abrahamic covenant in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The idea of Gentiles. Why did Peter need the vision to kick him in the rear to be obedient, to go up to Caesarea Philippi, or to Caesarea Maritima, and see Cornelius' house? Because Cornelius was Gentile.
Some people would say, well, yeah, this proves replacement theology, that Israel is going away and now the church, they're becoming the church. They're not becoming Israel. But if we look at Paul, and I know, my Christian brothers and sisters who have debated me on this subject, just in personal conversation, have said that I'm placing meaning on the olive branch and the root that Paul doesn't place there. However, I think it's clear that I believe it's clear to me, at least, that the olive branch in Romans 11 is Israel, and the root is the Abrahamic covenant, and that the Gentiles are grafted into the olive branch because of the root, and the root is, in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So, and some of the natural branches are broken off, others are unnatural branches are grafted in, so on and so forth.
It's such a beautiful picture, and even a child. This is the thing, when it gets to biblical truths, you just look at Yeshua's amazing parables, and then this image of the tree, and they're so gentle, and they lock into our memories, but that doesn't mean we get the full weight of what the image is, and so anyway, I just want to say that it's important for us to ponder what this tree means, and I think we should, if we're not sure of what the tree means in Romans 11, we should make that a priority, to chew on that, dive into that, ask questions, read Romans as an entirety, read the chapters like 9 and 10 leading up to it.
There's backstory to this.
So you have an ownership of what it is, and so you can talk about it intelligently with people who aren't aware of it.
There's backstory to this, by the way, because Rob and I had to chew on this passage, and we chewed on it separately, and we kind of chewed on it together. What was it, 2014, 2013, 2014, at Torah Resource Institute Family Camp. Rob and I had a discussion with some other people about what the olive tree was. And Rob and I disagreed, and we both disagreed with my father. And so it was really quite a fun.
I can't even remember that. You've got a good memory.
Oh man, it was, yeah. And so we went round and round for a bit about what the olive tree was, and it was really a good time of wrestling with it. And then after that, it took me about 6 to 8 months to research and understand and to really get the context before I solidified my own view on it. I think the funny thing is that now all three of us, my dad, Rob, and myself, are all in agreement, I believe, on what the olive tree is in this place, in Romans 11. Anyway, but I want to go even farther on a different rabbit trail, because now that we've opened this Pandora's box, the box, it's everywhere. And so several weeks ago, we talked, maybe it was last week, I forget, we talked about the idea of there's a new two house as opposed to the old two house. So somebody says, in modern two-house version is a house of Israel was divorced, Judah remains in covenant, house of Israel mixed with nations, and through Christ, death, resurrection, they were brought them back. So what's interesting about we talked about what we believe the 90s two-house was, and somebody wrote in and said, I don't understand, what's the difference, because we still see that two-house. The old two-house in the 90s, the way that I see old two-house, or the first two-house theological movement, was very bloodline oriented. It was based on British Israelism, and what this means is that the tribes of Israel, now in this idea, Judah and Israel is totally separate. Israel is dispersed among the nations. If you come to Christ in any way, shape, or form, and you become part of that covenant people, then you're actually one of those lost tribes of Israel. Therefore, everyone has some form of bloodline back to Israel who is a believer in Yeshua. This is and Bachi Wooten was kind of the catalyst for this understanding of the 90s two-house
and one of the anchor verses that you might see cited in there is in Matthew. I think is it in 10 and in 15, I think. It's only places in all the apostolic writings, Matthew 10 and 15. He says something about, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Yeah.
Lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that has been taken as that's been run up the flagpole,
right,
the banner, to say Yeshua came for bring the northern kingdom back to Judah. And it's a good sell. You know, I mean, you could write a book on that. You could make a movie on that. Yeah. You know, so it's got traction, but sadly, it's not accurate. Just because it has a ring to it doesn't mean it's actually true. First off, Judah needs the gospel, even if we allow that Yeshua came only for Israel, for the stock of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and no one else. You still have the problem of Judah needs. It's very clear from the scriptures that it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or non-Jewish. You need Yeshua, right? If for salvation. But aside from that, as Caleb, you already pointed out earlier today, and we have it time and again, the Abrahamic covenant it's clear. He says, count the stars, if you're able. That's an imperative.
And it talks about the nations coming and bowing, and the nations, right? It talks about
Isaiah 2,
right?
Right? Come, let us go up. Right? These are the nations that are, and they're not Israel. They're not lost Israel. These are non-Israel that are worshiping the God of Israel. And they're coming and they're forsaking any other orientation to reality,
The point here, so that this is what I consider to be the 90s theological understanding of two house. Now, somebody wrote us and said, okay, we still see this today. And actually, Joshua in the chat room says it's creeping into our British Israelism is creeping into our congregation again. So this form of theology of two house is still alive. It hasn't gone away.
There's no question, because if you ever go into like a used bookstore or even like a Goodwill, and you go through their Bible books, you'll see books, for 50 cents or 25 cents, that are those books from the 80s and 90s that are pushing that. And people, so they're super low hanging fruit in terms of accessible literature. Someone who's even started to think about Shabbat or something, from a Christian, might just grab onto that and say, oh, here's someone who's thinking about this. And they're the ones who are going to be vulnerable to consuming that and not having anyone's experienced, helping them learn to walk the path and avoid the pitfalls, etc. They're going to be on their own learning curve, and that's okay. Sometimes that's what the Lord has in store for us, is to go and experience some of these different things and get to the end of the logic of the system and go, oh, this doesn't actually gel with the whole of Scripture. So,
but hang on just a sec. We have to explain, though, because we're way off in the weeds, I know, and that's okay. We'll bring it back. But we have to explain now what the difference is between what I'm calling the 90s two-house theology as opposed to the modern two-house theology. You have these people, God bless them, and their brothers and sisters in the Lord, I'm not putting them down at all, but you have these people who are now coming into the Torah movement in maybe, after 2009, 2010, sometime after that, they've been in the Torah movement now 5-10 years, something like that, whatever. And the idea of two-house for them is different than this 90s theology. To them, it has nothing to do with bloodline. To them, it has to do with the idea that Israel and Judah were split. Israel was scattered among the nations. Judah is in Israel still. And that God is calling back the lost tribes of Israel to the land and the people of Israel. Now, if we're going to classify two house,
you mean like today? Yeah.
Today.
Well, you'll see that you don't even have to have any kind of Christianity or New Testament influence in your ideology or in your religion, because even in the state of Israel, don't they? Some of the Beta Israel or whatever from Africa, and they leave their tribes of Israel. Right. They're like long lost, tribes. Okay, so there's people who are framing their life with that narrative, and the gospel is not a transformative part of their life, So
the only problem that I have with this modern idea of two-house theology is that Judah was scattered too. Judah didn't stay in it. You can't look at Hasidic Jews today and say, "Oh, they're all from Judah."
Right.
In other words, you're trying to put people into these categories that the categories are much more broad than that. The Sephardic Jews that were scattered and we have it from every tribe. It's not like Judah somehow kept their land in Israel and weren't scattered about. And you can't look at people who have been in the land before before 1948 and say, "Oh yes, they must be from the tribe of Judah," or "They must be from the southern tribes." It's not. I'm sorry, that's just not the reality that we know.
Another way to think of it: tribal affiliation cannot really be empirically demonstrated,
and that's the point. And so
there's people they'll do a blood test or whatever on a genealogy, and they'll say, "Oh, I've got, some fraction of Ashkenazi or whatever," and
right.
So they think that their DNA tells them that we have Jewish blood way back, or we have Native American blood.
But the point for me is I can swallow the modern two-house theology more than I can the 90s two-house theology. But what I'm saying is that it seems that there is this clear distinction between the two, because the modern two-house theology is saying more, no, the nations are coming too. The nations are coming to the Lord as well, but we have to recognize these two different houses of Israel and Judah.
There's actually another one.
Go for it. I want to hear
that I've
this.
encountered. Native American Israelitism.
Yeah,
and this is older than Mormonism. This we have back into the 15th, at least 16th century colonial writings, and people, and this is where, Joseph Smith got a lot of his inspiration. People were ready to believe this, right? That there were Native American tribes that spoke some kind of dialect of Hebrew, and they were the lost tribes of Israel. And the Book of Mormon leverages that myth.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of. So if you look at early Mormon objectives, it's like to reunite the tribes of Israel in Zion. Well, where's Zion? Well, it's not Jerusalem. It's in Illinois, or I don't know exactly where it was, but they had I
think it's Pennsylvania, but
they had a Zion, right? And anyway,
what's interesting about this is that
it's a powerful ideology.
It's so powerful that it creeps into. It creeps into the Hebrew roots of the Messianic movement even today, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but to think that God has created some kind of covenant relationship with with national America, in and of itself, is replacement theology. We've spoken before about Jonathan Cahn and his idea of if
America is in covenant with God.
Well, he wouldn't say that. Cahn he tries to be very careful, even though I'm convinced that and I know that he's not trying to do this, but I'm convinced that what Cahn is putting forward is actually Americanism and or replacement theology of America with Israel. And he would say, no, not at all. But the idea that if we continue in our ways, we are going to bring the covenant curses on us.
Which means we're already in the covenant.
Right, which means that in the covenant, you just have to assume that if we keep the covenant, if America as a nation keeps the covenant, then what? We'll receive the covenant blessings. But the problem is that God never talks about the land of America, and God never talks about being in covenant with America, and he never talks about America as being his land. The reason the covenant is,
the whole earth is his, but yeah,
absolutely. But if we look at and this is something that I've started to really ponder and look at in the scriptures. If we look at the covenants, it's completely attached to the land itself, the land of Israel. In other words, we tithe the land, right? The idea of tithing money, you don't tithe money except for the holy half shekel once a year. That's an offering, a free will offering. You can give money to the temple, but you can't. Basically, you tithe the produce. Why? Because the land is the Lord's.
It's the priest's due. I mean, it's
exactly.
It's an economy. It's an actual.
This is also why you're not allowed to, like, the land goes back to the tribal rightful owner in the Jubilee year, right? Is because the land is the Lord's and it belongs to him. But you can sell your property in the city. In other words, the agricultural land out in the, farmland, essentially. This is the land that God, you have to wrest the land from being tilled and being harvested. Why? Because the land is the Lord's. You have to let the land rest every 7 years. Why? Because the land is the Lord's. You have to, well, if you live in an apartment in the city, what's the repercussions? I mean, what do you have to do for that? You can't let your land rest if you're living in an apartment in the city of Jerusalem, even in that time, even when Israel came into the land. So, we're off in the weeds now, but the point is that the idea
we're back in the weeds.
Yeah, exactly. The point is that the idea that America is God's land, sure, in the broader sense of the entire world is the Lord's, absolutely. But the idea that we can keep the covenant and all of a sudden we get all the covenant blessings, I'm sorry, I don't see it in Scripture. Okay, we got just a couple minutes left. We'll probably pick this conversation back up. But let's look at this just real quick. Let's start to get into it. Here's the second argument that I see in this, and we'll probably touch on this a lot more next week. This is the idea that God divorced Israel, and the only way that Israel can come back and be in covenant relationship with God is if one of the two parties dies. And therefore, God sends Yeshua to die on the cross. He dies, and now he can marry Israel again. I think that one of the reasons that this is so annoying to me is because I think that this is just, it misses the mark on why Yeshua died. And it's totally and completely not scriptural. And the reason I think this, and should we jump into this right now? Or do you, what?
Yeah, we can do that. We can pick it up next week.
Okay, so this is based on Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house. And if she goes and becomes another man's wife, this is very important this is a very important statement, and the rest of the passage.
This is all the setup. This is everything read is the setup.
And the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house. Or if the latter man dies, who took her to be his wife, then her former husband, who sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord. And you shall not bring sin upon the land. Once again, we're talking about land. You shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. So within the Hebrew roots and Messianic movement, this is a really big point. It seems like this theology of, Jesus had to die so that God could marry Israel again. This is like a real big pushing theology right now. The problem is that
and it's built on a certain reading of Romans 7, right? I think we've talked about this before. Yeah.
Have we? Let's go to Romans 7.
Okay. We can do that. Right at the beginning.
Or do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only as long as he lives. For a married woman is bound by the law to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, oh yes, I understand what you're saying now. I get what you're saying. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. And if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. Yes, we have talked about this.
Oh yeah. So the picture though is what I'm understanding you were describing earlier is this was the predicament God got it. God was in a predicament.
Right.
He divorced his wife, but he had previously made an eternal covenant.
Right. I'm not laughing at anyone who believes this, by the way.
And so the predicament was, what does he do? Well, if he dies, he releases her from. This is the way I think it's put together.
Right.
She's somehow released from being an adulteress because her husband's now dead.
Right.
So that any claim of her being an adulteress somehow have disappeared. So her sin's gone, which is problematic. Because if she was an adulteress while her sin is while her husband was alive, that sin remains even if her husband dies. So anyway, but then somehow hang on, just like wait.
Let's stop right there because that's a great point. So in other words, a man is married to a woman. She cheats on her husband with another man.
She's right by Torah right there. She's an adulteress.
She's an adulteress. Now, all of a sudden, in the next 5 days, he finds out, he's upset. He has a heart attack. He dies. That doesn't mean that her sin is gone.
That does not relieve her from her. Right. That does not solve her problem.
Exactly. In other words, she should still be under discipline. Right. If it was in Torah time, she'd still be stoned.
Yeah. So, well, it's a good question. But in any event, we're the idea of Paul here describing why Yeshua had to die is not so that to solve this conundrum of applying Deuteronomy 24 with God's covenant with Israel.
I want to make, somebody accused me of laughing at people that I disagree with. I'm not laughing at anyone who believes this. The reason I'm laughing is because what I don't understand, a piece of me is because I don't know what to do except for laugh. It's either laugh or cry, right? But the biggest problem with this theology is that it basically takes a portion of Deuteronomy 24. And that portion is, hang on, let's go back to it. Deuteronomy 24. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house. Now, what this theology has to do is then skip. It has to skip down to verse 24. You're not allowed to marry her again because she'll bring sin on the land. Basically, you've skipped almost the entire passage, which is that she goes and she marries another. The problem is that Israel has never gone and married another. She's whored, right? Jeremiah is clear on this. She's gone and she's whored. The imagery is very vivid, right? Jeremiah, Hosea, they're this.
Drawing on this imagery in the same way in Jeremiah 2, the prophet paints them as a thief, right? That Israel is Judah is a thief. So, and then in the same chapter in Jeremiah 3, where we talk about the divorce, he also then talks about Israel as God's children, as his sons.
Right.
So what prophets do is they draw on the Torah and then they leverage God's justice in the Torah to preach repentance. That's the leverage. The leverage of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah 3, I believe, is the only explicit where it's clearly quoting Deuteronomy 24. We have Hosea, and we have a little bit in Isaiah, I think it's chapter 50. But Jeremiah 3 is where it's explicit. It's obvious that Jeremiah is looking at the Deuteronomy 24 passage that you just read, Caleb, and he's using that to leverage to call Israel to repentance. And there's so many ways, there's so much to talk about this. But here's a core point, is that there is no husband like Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Israel can't go and marry another husband. What Israel does, or Judah, in the case of Jeremiah 3, goes and plays the harlot over and over again with different lovers, right, as in the poetic metaphor here. And what is demonstrated is that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has an eternally binding love for Israel. That even though he's angry for because he's hates transgression, but the underlying covenantal love is forever. It's unbreakable. He swore by himself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So there is no other, in fact. And this gets us kind of back to the 10 words idea. There will be no other Elohim, right? Elohim Acharim before me.
Jessica gives us an example of the way that she was taught and understood this theology, which is that God could not come back into covenant with her, Israel, because he had divorced her and she married another. That is idols. But we don't see that. Nowhere, there's multiple things that need to be said here. And actually, so we should probably reference at some point Avery, right? Gary Avery, is it? Yeah, Gary Avery is...
Gary Yates?
Yates, I'm sorry. Gary Yates is a doctor of theology, and he gave a lecture on this at the 2018 Evangelical Theological Society in Denver, Colorado. It's fantastic, by the way. And I listened to it yesterday, and I believe that Rob was actually there listening to Dr. Yates.
I liked it.
And so he brings up some interesting points. So first of all, Israel never goes and marries another. We don't have any contract. There's nowhere in history that we see Israel making some kind of covenant relationship with idols. And that's not the way that the scripture describes it either, right? It doesn't say that Israel goes and marries other gods. She goes and whores with them. A whore doesn't marry everyone that she is doing wrong things with. She didn't come into covenant relationship.
And another way to think of that is that there's nowhere in the Torah that says that the woman who is sent away can't return.
Right, exactly.
Initially. It's only that it's the subsequent clause, and she becomes another's wife.
Exactly.
Right?
So, and I want to go on with...
She can't go back.
Right. I want to go on with what Jessica says. She said, because this is a great outline of how people understand this, and honestly how it was presented to me. So God dies, releasing him and her, and then comes alive again because he's new. This is wrong all throughout Scripture. God does not become new. God makes Israel new.
Right. We're the ones that knew.
We're the ones that are transformed. We're transformed from those who go after idols into those who are drawn to Christ and regenerated, made new man, new person, new in Christ, right? We're new all the way around. And
this is back to Romans 7:1. He says, do you not know? I'm speaking to those who know the Torah, that the Torah has jurisdiction over a person as long as he lives. That's the point. That's a fundamental truth. The Torah has jurisdiction over you as long as you're alive. And if you're convicted as a sinner before the Torah, you've got a problem because there's a penalty for that.
Right.
And that person that is guilty has to die. And the point is that in Yeshua, through substitutionary atonement, he has paid a debt, and I have died through him, even though this flesh and blood body wasn't even alive when he did this for me. And even though this flesh and blood body is still breathing, the legal standing before the Torah is that my sin debt is paid. That person has died, and therefore there's no standing. That the law that held me as a sinner no longer, the overarching umbrella of the Torah is still there, but the obligation to death is not there anymore.
Yeah, the payments were paid.
And then the flip side is true. The blessing of obedience that Yeshua enjoys forever, he also shares with us. And so we have the blessing of the Torah, which is eternal life. That's the transaction that happens. That's why Romans 8:1 or 8:2 is so important. The law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua has freed you from the law of sin and death. It's the Torah, but you're not you've transitioned from being under the curse of the Torah and death and sin and darkness. That problem between you and God has been solved, and you're now abiding in the blessing. Why? Not because anything you did, but because Yeshua fulfilled the legal requirement. So there's so much beautiful theology here, and if we'll miss that if we if we allow ourselves in Romans 7 to get steered into thinking that somehow God had to do the dying. God, yes, okay, to pay for the sin, but we're the ones that need to be new.
Right.
God doesn't change. That's the point. Same yesterday, today, and forever.
Joshua makes a great point. Asks a great question in the chat room. He says, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but is Christ dying by taking on our sin, the infidelity, to bring Israel back into covenant with Him, wrong? No, the point is that He dies to make us new. It's that we die to ourself. And this basically
teaches us how to die.
We have
the Torah written on our heart. It's Jeremiah 31. It's
being born again. John 3, right? And it's
forgiveness of sins.
Right.
I will forgive their sins. I will not remember their iniquities no more, etc. I'll write my Torah on their hearts. That is a new creation.
Exactly.
New birth. Yes. Resurrection. Those are the different metaphors.
And it's not just Israel as a nation, right?
Right. Well, it's the expanded,
Jew and Gentile.
It's Israel opening up back to the Romans 11. And without faith, you're not part of the tree, right? Because the core, being on the tree means you're justified, right? And the only way you could be justified is the same way our father Abraham was justified, which is by faith. It's not a work. It's a gift. It's a gift. Lest any man should boast. The reason any of us are justified is never a leverage over against somebody else. That we're better. Somehow we're positioned better before God than someone else. If we have any inkling of that, that's bad theology, and we need to eradicate that from our heart by the Holy Spirit.
Somebody said to me, this is several months ago, they said, "You're such a hypocrite. You're just such a hypocrite. You know, you say that we should follow Christ and all these things, but what about you? Aren't you a sinner?" And my response was, absolutely. I am no better than you. I don't think I'm better than you. I'm a sinner, probably worse than you. The difference is, and I mean, this was a very difficult conversation because it came from a rebuke that I had to give to someone. And my response was, yes. The difference is that the Lord I've given my life. In other words, my life is no longer mine. I'm being conformed. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. And I'm certainly my life.
You're trusting Yeshua's doing the building. Yeah.
And not only that, but I can see, and other people can see as well. You know, my wife and we're working together to conform to Christ as a unit. So this is, it's the continual sanctification. Am I perfect? Absolutely not, and I know I'm not. But we continually, every day, try to die to self, and this is Paul talks about this, right? If you're a believer, and you say that you're not a sinner, then you got bigger problems.
Yeah,
so,
then you're not in the new covenant. That's evident that you don't understand the new covenant, because in 1 John it says if we say we have no sin, it says the truth is not in us. His word is not in us. Well, the only way his word is in you is through the terms of the new covenant. There's no other way to have the Torah on the heart except through the reality of what Yeshua's work is on our behalf.
So I want to go back to Joshua real quick. And, we haven't even touched on, I don't know if it might be hard to get back into this conversation next week because we've touched on a lot of it, but
we'll come back around to it.
We can come back around to it. I want to touch real quick on the lecture that we were talking about. I do want to talk about some of his endpoints before we leave. But Joshua says, I hope that I did not come as an attack. Not at all. Sometimes when we're talking, a lot of people think that we get excited and that we're attacking. No, I think that was a great question. I agree. It was our sin that separated us and that needed to be dealt with in order to bring us back. I also was referring to Israel as believers. Fair enough. Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to attack you either. These are great questions and things that we're all trying to understand better, wrestle with. I think, and Yates is, Gary Yates, right? Gary Yates's lecture was really a very good one. He kind of opened my eyes to some of the things that I hadn't thought about before. And so this idea of God made us new, not that he has to die and be new. These are three notes that I wrote down during the lecture as I was listening to it. Yates suggests that Israel is not able to return, not because she married another, which she is not, but rather because she is engaging in continued whoring.
Right.
And
exactly.
his point to this is, where is the divorce certificate? In other words, he clearly gave Israel a covenant of a land covenant, right? That is supposed to be seen in the imagery of the prophets as the marriage certificate, right? So the covenant is the marriage certificate, and so Yates's point is, okay, if the marriage covenant is so clearly seen and given, and we can hold it and see it, where's the divorce certificate? We can't see it anywhere. And then Yates also notes that the biggest difference between the regulations in Deuteronomy 24 and God and Israel is that God's new bride is just that, new. God has the ability to change Israel into a new person. And what Yates suggests is that the language itself suggests that the prophets are not actually saying that God literally divorced Israel, but rather they're using this as metaphor of Israel needing to return to God.
And it's like a teaching moment. It's leveraging God's law, written justice, right, as a prod to repentance.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
Okay. I think that this
and when we just one more point on the metaphor,
please.
We'll find Israel as God's son, Israel as a wayward woman, Israel as a thief, right? All the prophets draw on these different kinds of Torah themes. And obviously it can't be both true literally, that Israel is God's wife and God's son, right? We can't literally, so we have to say, that's why we use the word metaphor. He's using God's express justice, the prophets are, to demonstrate God's enduring covenant loyalty and the severity of that he's serious, the severity of the crimes, the severity of the rebellion, the transgression, the worship of other gods, etc.
Yeah. So I want to just emphasize one more time, and in Jeremiah 3:4, he's using multiple metaphors, right? And you touched on this, Rob, but I think we should maybe emphasize it. Is that in Jeremiah 3:4, he uses the metaphor of father and son, right? My father, you are. Have you not just now called to me, my father? You are the friend of my youth. Will he be angry forever? Will he be indignant to the end? Behold, you have spoken. So in other words, he's using these metaphors to try to say, look, return. So I think, and now obviously once we get down to 8, once again, I think that he's using this metaphor. And I would encourage people to contact, if you're interested in Dr. Gary Yates's lecture, you might be able to contact him and see if he's on, I haven't seen if he's on academia.com, but he might make his notes on this lecture might be available somewhere, or he might have written an article on this. Now, the big clincher is going to come in, 3:8. She saw she saw that for all the adulteries of the faithful one Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she too went and played the whore. Because she took her whoredom lightly, she polluted the land, committing adultery with stone and tree. And this is something that I think we need to talk about more, and something that we'll talk about in future shows to come.
Well, yeah, and in Jeremiah 3, there's wordplay going on as well. Like at the beginning, it talks about Re'im Rabim, which is many companions or many lovers. But then later in a couple verses later, he says, I will give you ro'im,
Right.
shepherds after my heart. In other words, and in Hebrew it's spelled the same way, resh, ayin, yod, mem. The vocalization is different. And then the verb ra is used for the evil that Israel was doing, or Judah was doing. But then the new shepherds, it says ra'u, they will tend my sheep. They will feed, pasture my people. So there's so many layers of meaning that the prophet is drawing from to make this just a wallop of a rebuke.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because God's heart is repentance for his people, obviously. I mean, that's the prophets are, what are the prophets doing except calling Israel to abandon idolatry and come back to the covenant? Right? I mean, that's what it is. So
okay. Well, I hope that this conversation, I've enjoyed this conversation. I always enjoy, these kind of, it's always fun to get on and talk about these kind of issues, especially issues that are somewhat controversial. I know a lot of people in the Hebrew Roots and Messianic movement believe this theology that, that we've laid out, and that's fine. It's certainly not something that's a central doctrine that is a, what do they call them in mainstream Christianity? I forget. Anyway, a central doctrine. Anyway, okay. If you want to be a part of the conversation, please be a part of the conversation. 253-465-3205. Let us know what you think and where you think we're wrong, we're right, whatever it is. Let us know. 253-465-3205. You can also shoot us an email, chag@torahresource.com. That's chag@torahresource.com. And of course, don't forget, sign up for classes at torahresource.com right now. You have less than a week to do so. And so I would encourage you to go and sign up for classes. Take a class with Rob. Studies in the Torah. It's going on right now. All right, brothers and sisters, we hope that this show did one thing, which is glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? Because Messiah matters.